Well, well, well. You want to start reading fantasy. Or maybe you've tried reading fantasy because you want some dragons in your life. Don't blame you. But every time you try, those ridiculously long descriptions make you want to cry. Well, I've got some books that will solve that problem and make you never want to read something normal ever again. And maybe you'll almost feel as cool as this guy as you're reading. No promises, though. You want to get into reading fantasy? Well, I got you. Some of these recommendations are going to be more rooted in this world, in case that's the hard part for you. Others will be like high fantasy, which is like nothing rooted in this world, but just easier with the like buttery, flowery descriptions. Because I feel like that's like a big problem that people have with fantasy and why people can't get into fantasy is because fantasy writers are notoriously very descriptive writers. And so we like to just go all out with describing landscape or world building and whatever. And to a degree it's necessary, and then to a degree I understand that it's like,
okay, you've been describing a tree for 5 pages, let's move on.
So these are my 7 book recommendations for if you want to get into fantasy. So let's begin. I have a mixture of more on the like not child but like younger, easier reading audience side, which I will say though adults can also enjoy these books. I still enjoy them till this day, but these are just books that I read when I was younger, but I can still enjoy them now as an adult. And I do think that obviously since they were written for a younger audience, there is inherently less crazy dialogue or less crazy descriptions. It's more action based, it's like more happens quicker, and there's also like all 3 of these recommendations are based like in the real world. They just have fantastical elements, or they're like almost like a magical, like surreal setting within this world. So if you're looking for something that's kind of like more on the gritty detective side, whatever, and you like want to have like kind of like a whodunit mystery vibe within your fantasy, and you want to like kind of have magical elements, or you're like willing to start like, I don't know, deepening your palette of fantastical things, this is the book for you. It is Jackaby by William Ritter. This book is basically like a supernatural Sherlock Holmes spin-off. It is a YA book, so a young adult book. This girl who is from England, she comes from England to America, meets this guy named Jackaby who she ends up living with, and accidentally it's like a Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson spin-off. She's the Watson and he's the Sherlock Holmes, but within all of the cases that they solve, they're all fantastical. So it's like a magical creature that has caused it, or there's like a kind of magical twist on the murder that happened, and they like find out that the killer was like a creature and not a person or whatever. It's really good. It's not too crazy with its descriptions. It does have a little bit of older dialogue, like older English dialogue, because it's based in 1892, but it's not too crazy. Again, it's written for young adults, so I'm out of breath. The next book that I recommend is The Alchemist by Michael Scott, and I know you're probably thinking of Michael Scott from The Office. That's what I thought too. If you know anything about like Nicholas Flamel and like alchemy and whatever, this is the book. So basically it's about these twins, and there's a prophecy about them. They both have different powers that they don't really know about yet, but they kind of start figuring out. And so this book is kind of like the catalyst of them like meeting Nicholas Flamel and his wife. So it like takes historical facts of people who already existed and adds a magical twist to it. This book was written in 2007, so it's based in like 2007, but like present day. So there's cars, there's cell phones, there's airplanes, there's whatever, there's normal houses, they talk like normal people. And again, this was written for a younger audience, so the writing itself is not flowery, it's not too descriptive. But if you do want an introduction to like more like hardcore magic, where there's like more rules, like more backstory, more world building, this is a really good active way to get into it without getting overwhelmed. Yes, sometimes I do think it is a little immature, meant for more younger audiences, but again, as an adult, I read this last year and I still enjoyed it, so. I've just been standing. There are a lot of cows in this field. What just happened? Where did you come from? The next book, and everyone knows about this, and I know that everyone has opinions, so I'm not condoning the author at all. I don't appreciate her views. I am in no shape or way supporting the author. I am only supporting the story. So please, as a disclaimer, don't hate me. I do not at all enjoy the author as a person. I don't agree with her views at all. So that's a disclaimer. And now, of course, you know what I'm talking about is Harry Potter. Harry Potter, everyone knows about Harry Potter. I don't feel like I have to explain it. If you don't know what it's about, it's set in like, I think the late 90s into early 2000s. There's a wizarding world living within the normal human world, and it's about Harry Potter, who's a wizard. His parents died. He almost died at the hands of a very evil wizard who's trying to take over the world throughout the rest of the series, and he's kind of like the chosen one. He's going through school, so you get his whole school experience of him growing up while also kind of uncovering and solving and defeating this big bad guy. Again, it was originally a children's book, so the writing is incredibly easy to understand. However, I will say the author did a really good job. I'm not even going to say her name, but the author did a really good job at like world building and creating a really like so intricate that it's like believable world without using honestly hardly any flowery descriptions. So if that's your big problem with fantasy, read Harry Potter, because it literally just tells you everything as it is, and it's written in a way that's incredibly digestible and believable and keeps you in the story in an active way without getting lost with all the descriptions. I honestly do really recommend this whole series. It's a 7-book series if you didn't know that, and each book he gets older, so it gets more mature. I think from book 5 on I always cry a little bit, so it's a really good story. Again, I don't like the author, but I can't not say it. So the last book that is kind of more grounded in reality that I would definitely recommend to get started into fantasy, because it's honestly not necessarily even pure fantasy. It's like kind of more magical surrealism. Again, has magical elements in it. So if you're looking to start dipping your toes into fantastical elements, this book is really a great option. It is an adult book though, so if you are a young audience, I would say even like 15 and under, it might be a little hard to read at times because it's just a really intense book. But again, if you're just open and whatever, go for it. It is a romance at times as well though. Not spicy at all, but it's a very heart-wrenching book, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. It's about this girl who is in a small town in France, and she realizes she just doesn't want to die in the same plot of land that she was born in. On the night of her wedding day, actually, she makes a deal basically with the devil that she wants to live forever, and so he makes the deal, but in exchange for her living forever, no one remembers her. So if she like meets someone for the first time, literally if she turns around a corner and then comes back, they forget who she is and they don't know who she is. So basically it's the whole story surrounding that, and then obviously at some point she meets a boy and then he remembers her. So it's their whole story, and it also goes into all the magic and her relationship with the darkness. He's not really the devil, he's just like, I think he's called the darkness or something, whatever. It's like soft magic, like there's hardly anything in it. But if you just want a tiny tinge to just like really like dip a fingernail in even, this one is perfect. This section is for people who maybe you've read a couple fantasy books already and you're like, you know what, I think I might be ready for a little bit more, but you know, those really big flowery descriptions, still not for me. But I think I can handle more world building, a little bit higher doses of magic, a little bit more intense just fantasy. Throw me in. This is the section for you. The first book is, again, another book by V.E. Schwab, and it is a darker shade of magic. It has like an element of normal world, this world period-ish, but it's a Victorian age London. It's about people who can like travel between worlds, basically. There's 3 Londons. There's Grey London, there's White London, and there's Red London. The main character, Kells, can travel between Londons, which is kind of weird. You'd think it's like, why is it just at one city? But no, it's like a whole world pretty much. Something from White London, which is like basically a sick and deceased. No one wants to go there. Only bad things come from there, so like people should stay out. Something from that London falls into the hands of someone in the wrong London, and so he needs to save the world within and save all 3 Londons. He meets a girl who's from Grey London, which is like the normal mundane world, and so then they end up working together. She's a thief and kind of morally gray person. They end up working together. There's a mild love story in there too, but again, really good with the descriptions. It is definitely a lot more fantastical world building elements here. If you want to like kind of dive head first but still want a tiny bit like hold on to a little bit more of mundane reality, this one's perfect. Last 2 books have no reality in it. If you could compare it to anything, one of them that I'm about to tell you is more of like almost a dystopian setting. It's kind of has some medieval vibes, but it's more its own like universe, kind of almost sci-fi-y, and that is Mistborn, and my copy is absolutely destroyed, so please don't judge me, by Brandon Sanderson. It has absolutely no shred of normal reality, I guess, in it. I would suggest this for someone who has read maybe a few lighter fantasy books already, or maybe someone who's just like, you know what, screw it, I want to get into it, I'm just diving headfirst. The reason why I picked this book again is he's not super crazy with his descriptions. He's really good at delivering world building without going over the top and without boring you. The story itself is incredibly compelling. It's like a con book, so like a group of people come together to perform a huge con and to kind of like overthrow the government. Obviously it doesn't go right all the way. It is a trilogy. This is honestly the best book in my opinion, so if you just read this book, you're fine. Mistborns have like the ability to manipulate metals in their system in order to have like special powers, so it's kind of still based in reality. The magic doesn't just like float from everywhere or anywhere. Like it's still based in like more of like a scientific logical explanation, so if that's another thing that's hard for you, this book is perfect. The last book is my favorite fantasy book of all times, and I know you must be thinking probably like,
oh, this girl's gonna freaking recommend me Lord of the Rings or something.
no. I'm probably gonna get really bashed on for this, but I really did not like reading The Lord of the Rings to the point where I didn't even finish them. I started Fellowship of the Rings and stopped halfway through. The only Lord of the Rings book I've ever finished is The Hobbit. Don't hate me, please. This book is my favorite fantasy book of all times, and it's also, again, more based in like scientific facts that like are more digestible than any other fantasy book. And that book is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. If you're wanting a story that is already finished, don't read this book. Patrick Rothfuss has written the first 2 books and has taken 11 years to write the last book, and it still hasn't come out. So if that's something that is important to you, just don't even bother with this book, because who knows, it could be another 11 years before the last one comes out. But besides the point, this book is a work of art. I'm not even sugarcoating it. The world building in this is exquisite without being too wordy. Again, like I made sure to think about all of these books in a way that's delivered without being so wordy and like overly descriptive that you lose interest, because I know that's like a big thing with fantasy that a lot of people get turned off on. It's like, it's too flowery, there's too much whimsical magic and whatever, then it doesn't make sense and it's just stupid. No. Not this one. I will fight anyone who says this book sucks. Why am I out of breath? This book covers the life of a man named Quoth. Over the past few years, this man Quoth is basically like a legend. People have all of these extravagant stories of him that are more like fantastical, like he has a cloak of shadows, or like he can just like snap his fingers and make flames erupt and blah blah blah. He's just done a whole bunch of crazy fantastical things that no one has ever been able to do. Whatever. Like all of these crazy things that people can't do because it's kind of more of like a normal person world. There are like magic users, but they all go to a place called the university, and all of the university is actually based in science. They like have to learn a scientific way to make magic. That's why this Quoth man is such a legend, because it seems like he just has magic that comes out of nowhere. The story covers the actual Quoth. Quoth is a pub keeper, and this guy who's a storyteller finds Quoth and asks Quoth to tell him his story. Book 1 covers the first day of Quoth telling his story. This covers, I think, about the first like 15 years of his life, and then book 2 is day 2 of him telling his story, and that's like the next, I think it ends when he's like 18 or 19. There is some heavy magical elements in it actually. So basically throughout the story he is trying to find a group of people who killed his family. I don't remember what they're called, but basically this group of like mysterious magical creatures who are like actual dark magical beings, and so that's like intertwined throughout the story, so you do get a light dose of heavy magic without it being too overwhelming. I hope any of these made any sense. I highly recommend all of these books. If you do end up reading any of these books, I hope you enjoy them. If you have any other like book recommendations, just put them down below, because I'm an author. I'll show you my book. This is my book. This is also high fantasy. I do admit that I have pretty descriptive, flowery world building usage in here, so yeah, but if you do want to just support me, this is a fun quest read. It's kind of like a more digestible Lord of the Rings. I'm kidding, I didn't like copy Lord of the Rings, but it's kind of similar. They go on a quest to save the realm and blah blah blah, but I don't describe trees for 50 pages. So if you want to read it, It's available on Amazon and anywhere online that you can find a book. I will see you guys next time. Happy reading. If you hate fantasy, then don't read any of these books.